Hey everyone, welcome to class. This is Bram Duffee here to talk about communication research. Today we're talking about coding research data and conducting content analysis. Content analysis is an important tool in research because it offers a structured method for interpreting communication patterns and being able to extract meaningful insights from data. At its core, content analysis helps researchers understand the language and interaction and makes it really helpful across various fields of study. There are two kinds of content analysis that we think about. We think of qualitative and quantitative content analysis forms. And qualitative content analysis is usually employed when researchers are working to understand the depth of meanings and the interpretations. And that would be a little bit different when we look at quantitative content analysis because it's used in a quantitative aspect when we're counting the frequency of certain words. And that might help us test a certain hypothesis that we're working on. But both qualitative and quantitative content analysis share similarities because they both have a long-standing history in research. They use a systematic approach to ensure consistency. And there's a series of defined steps to process that data and a reliance on the coding framework that you set up to organize that data. So there are some similarities, but at the same time, they differ in that qualitative analysis is data-driven. So a lot of times we see themes to emerge naturally from the data itself. And so that means that we are seeing what information comes out of the words that are there. And it's different because in quantitative analysis, a lot of times what we do is we take a predefined category and work with that. And so we sort of apply theories or apply categories to the material. So it's like in one case we're looking from within, and in another case we're looking from without. But within qualitative content analysis, there are a few different approaches I want to connect with you. And the first one is called the conventional approach. And when you're coding data, we're looking through transcripts, and when we do that in a conventional approach, we're going to work to figure out what codes come from that data without any preconceived categories. So it makes it really ideal for exploratory studies. And so this is the kind of research I normally like to do, which is I ask questions and I see what comes from those questions. And then those answers, I study what things are similar among participants. So I might interview 10 or 20 people and have similar questions and then see if those answers had themes that came up. And so if we're trying to describe something or understand something, this can be really helpful. So that's the conventional approach where you're looking from within the data to see what codes that can come up. And so let's say that you're reading the transcript and you find something interesting. It means that you can mark that as something that you could potentially see as a code that you want to explore the rest of the data for. So what that means is that let's say that one of your participants talks about books. So if they're talking about something that has to do with books, it means that now you have an opportunity and you think that that's interesting, that might be worth coding, then you can look at all the other participants' transcripts to see if that same topic came up. And so in that respect, you started from what people are saying, and you looked to see if other people were matching the same thing. So that's the conventional approach. The directive approach uses an existing theory or an existing research study that's already been done, and it applies that framework. So it is still looking from within the data, but it applies the framework to analyze that data. And so you might use a theory or a research guide that belongs to another study that would help you. So like if we were going to analyze therapy session transcripts, then you might take a psychological theory and apply it to that transcript that you're analyzing. And so because of that, it would help you derive the the particular code. So that is the directive approach. The summative approach involves counting keywords and content. And that sounds like what we talked about with quantitative analysis, but in this case, summative approach works to go beyond just the frequency of something, but they use that to interpret the underlying meaning behind it. So there are different shades to the same flavor here. It's just that we want to be, when we do research, we want to be clear about what we're doing and why we're doing it, right? And so when you're going to do coding research, the kind of research that you'll be looking for is the conventional kind of research, right, where you are looking for what comes from the participants and seeing what similarities that you can find. You know, there is a process to content analysis, and I want to mention some of these steps so that we can sort of see from start to finish, like what we're going to need to think about to break down the steps into simple language, right? And the first step when we work on our research study at all, most studies, is to review existing literature. It's spending time with the information that's already out there in the field about this area. So it involves reading and analyzing previous research studies that are related to your topic. So imagine that you're studying the effects of remote work on employee productivity. So by reviewing existing literature, you gain insights into what's already been discovered, and because of that, you know now what gaps of knowledge that are out there, right? So if people are talking about very specific types of concepts, then we can take 2 or 6 or 8 people who are talking about that concept, and based on what they're all talking about, lay this out in a way so that we see that there are still aspects that have not been explored or discussed or brought up that allow the topic to move forward. You know, one of the things that we say when we talk about research a lot is we talk about standing on the shoulders of giants. And what that means is that we are working to answer research questions, and we don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? So because of that, we want to see what's already been done, what people have already thought out, and so that when we study the topic, we're able to take the next step up. And so the only way we take the next step up is by using literature reviews to do that, because literature reviews help us build an understanding for the reader for what's going to happen in the research study, because it's showing like, hey, this is a problem. Hey, this is an issue. Hey, this is an aspect that other folks have not talked about. This is something that's not been explored. So all of those kinds of things are what can be answered by a literature review. And so it helps identify unexplored areas that can be addressed by the research that you're looking at. The next thing that you do is to really work to collect data that's relevant and rich in context. So that's really what's essential for a meaningful analysis. So you might conduct interviews with employees who've been working remotely to figure out, hey, firsthand information about their experiences. This kind of would form the foundation of your research, and it would need to be comprehensive and detailed. So we collect data, and a lot of times that collection is going to happen through creating a transcript, right? And we'll talk more about transcripts in a bit, but once you have your transcript, you want to prepare it for analysis. So that involves organizing your data so that it can be easily accessed and understood. For example, you might want to sort your interviews by key topics or questions so that you can streamline your analysis process, right? So if you asked everyone the same questions, then you can go through each participant's question and be able to compare those answers easily. When you begin the coding process, it's just important to know that this is all about identifying the patterns that are out there within the data that is in front of you. So you want to imagine that you're going through these interview transcripts and you start highlighting reoccurring words or phrases such as distractions at home or flexible working hours. So this kind of discovery helps you spot things that are common or maybe differences in your text. So back in the day, it was really common to print this out on paper and use different color highlighters to highlight different parts of transcripts that you can match up. Today, we do it a lot with coding data software or just by using the highlighter function or the notes function in Microsoft Word. So developing a coding framework comes next. The framework provides a structured approach for you to help yourself categorize the data that's in front of you. So, for example, if you're analyzing customer reviews, you might create categories like positive feedback, negative feedback, suggested improvements, that kind of thing. But whatever structure that you think that's going to help you organize your findings effectively. And then here we're nearly at your last step, but the themes that come out of this are really critical. So when you identify key categories and themes, it means that you have now recognized significant patterns and things that have emerged from the analysis that were interesting, that related to your research topic or your research question. So for example, you might find a common theme in your interview data that has something to do with work-life balance. And so because of that, that can be a focal point in your analysis. I'd say that one of the most frustrating things that can happen is that you go through to code data and you get to the last transcript and then you realize that that last transcript has something really interesting that you want to review all the other transcripts for, right? Because this is a potential commonality or difference that you can find that might be worth discussing. So when you pull all these categories together, you're able to see that participant A and B and L and K happen to bring up this aspect, and participant C and whatever these other ones would be bring up another aspect. You're able to analyze information based on these people think this, these people think that, and why is that? And so it means that you're working to do meaningful conclusions from your analysis. And a lot of that means that you're summarizing how the themes and the patterns that you've identified answer your research questions. So for example, you might conclude that remote work generally improves productivity, but you could also highlight that there's challenges that are present when you separate someone from work-life balance. So let's look at some different kinds of coding. One kind of coding is called open coding. It's the initial step where you break down the data into distinct parts. So imagine that you're analyzing interview transcripts from a study on this work-life balance. And so during open coding, you might highlight phrases like stressful deadlines or flexible hours or family time. So that kind of stuff identifies these as significant concepts or reoccurring ideas. And this method helps when you're working to pinpoint key elements that emerge from the raw data, and it allows you to work without any preconceived notions. Now, constant comparison is another process. It's like a dynamic process where you can continuously refine categories as the new data becomes available. So for instance, if you're examining survey responses on a customer satisfaction, you might start out with broad categories like positive feedback or areas for improvement. And then as more responses come in, comparing new answers with existing categories, that would help you refine those themes. So you might create new themes that help you accurately reflect the data's nuances. So when you have something that comes through that's particularly interesting and it doesn't fit that category, it's just time to make a new category. The other type of coding to think about is called theoretical coding, and it's about weaving these categories into a coherent framework. And it often is the kind of thing that can lead to theory development. So suppose you're studying the impact of social media on youth behavior. So after identifying categories like peer influence and self-expression through open and constant comparison coding, this theoretical coding would involve linking these categories to form a theory about how social media shapes adolescent identities. And so how in the world would you be able to make those kinds of connections by just doing some interviews? Well, the answer is that you might be doing 20 or 40 or more interviews, right? And so at some point we get to a point of data saturation where you have so many similar coded themes that you know that you don't need more participants. So that's theoretical coding, where you're coming up with codes as the information shapes. And then axle coding is another type of coding to mention, because it sort of takes it a step further. Axle coding is something that identifies relationships between categories. So if we talk about that social media example, axle coding might mean that we find a link between peer influence and self-esteem, right? So like saying that peer interactions on social platforms could have some kind of impact to a young person's confidence. So this kind of method helps us when we're working to understand these broader patterns, and it helps us figure out how some of these different themes can interconnect with each other. So it's sometimes you're in a position to be able to say a cause or effect relationship about something, and other times you're able to pull out important examples to make points. You know, the coding frame acts as a roadmap throughout this process, and it's something that guides researchers in building categories and themes that can help you with insights. So when we think of coding frames, I want you to think of it as like a filing system where each piece of data is systematically organized into different folders or categories, and subfolders, which would be like themes, right? So we have categories as a major part of the outline and themes as subpoints. This kind of structured approach can mean that the analysis is thorough and consistent and really capable of unveiling deeper meanings within the data. So by employing these kinds of methods, it helps researchers take complex data and move that complex data into some kind of deep insight that can help us understand the overall problem or the what's happening with that research topic. Now, discourse analysis is a little bit different from coding, and we're going to talk about discourse analysis next. But one of the things to know is that you can code information, and that take on a life of its own, right? And so when we think about the fact that we're going to conduct all these interviews or conduct all these focus groups and then take this data and do something with it, you know, just doing the interview was not enough to get us there. Doing the interview or that focus group was something that allowed us